Paula Pant, the host of the Afford Anything podcast, likes to answer questions her listeners send in. This is a special episode where she also has Joe Saul-Sehy from the Stacking Benjamins show join in the fun.
Hi, Paula. I've been listening to your show for a couple of months now, and you do such a great job with advice and interviewing interesting people. My question is about Roth 401k plans. I'm 30 years old and have only recently got out of my training program. I'm a fairly high earner who makes about $200,000 pre-tax annually. As soon as I started working for my new employer, I signed up to fully fund my traditional 401k plan and contribute the full $18,000 a year. I've been talking to a financial advisor who recommended an overfunded life insurance policy for post-tax dollars at retirement. I even went so far as to get the physical, apply, and be approved for the policy, but after listening to you and Joe from Stacking Benjamins, I decided not to purchase the policy. My question is this. My employer offers both a traditional 401k plan as well as a Roth 401k plan. I'm interested in hearing your opinion on if I should fund the traditional 401k or the Roth 401k. My current plan was to fund the traditional and then start investing in an IRA, which I could consider converting in the future. I'm really not sure how to best invest the money I have for retirement. I save about 50% of my income, so I have a good sum of money to put away, and I would love to hear your advice on the traditional versus Roth 401k and where to go from there. Thanks.
Chris, awesome job on not purchasing the life insurance policy. I think that it could work, and I understand the advisor, so I don't think your advisor is a complete moron for recommending that. But as Paula and I said on the earlier show that I think the one that you listened to, lots and lots of other things you can do before you get to that step. So I'm not quite sure you're there. So good call on letting the life insurance policy go.
Wait, a quick time out. For anybody who's listening, I don't want to go too far off the rails, but for anybody else who's listening who is wondering why, why?
Why is it a good idea or why was it a bad idea?
Both.
Okay. Life insurance for people that have tons of discretionary income has this cool thing that's like a Roth IRA where if you stuff it full of money and you continue to stuff it full of money, the most that the IRS will actually let you put in it, you end up minimizing the cost of the insurance. And if the policy is structured correctly, you can take the money out very similar to the Roth IRA. And if you pass away and you have a family, the family still gets the death benefit. So the cost ends up being low. The money ends up being in a tax shelter. It ends up being a way, way, way better way than going than an annuity. And for people in a very high tax bracket can also be a nice shelter. But as I said on the past show, you got to be in a really high tax bracket. You got to make a lot of money and you have to have done pretty much everything else first, right? Mm-hmm. You've socked money every other place. And so Chris is already max funding the 401k. So that's number one. Probably putting some money into non-qualified flexible accounts. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, then what's the next thing? Then if he's going to try to use any other tax shelters, he can put money, real estate's tax advantage. That might be a nice place. Mm-hmm. Or he's got to go into something like an annuity. But when I compare an annuity with the type of thing Chris is talking about, the life insurance generally is a better option for somebody in a very high tax bracket. So that's that 1% of people that we talked about on that show where the shoe might fit. But I see those strategies used way, way, way more than the 1% of the time that they're actually used. It's not a good idea because of the fact that you have to continue to fund the life insurance at a huge, you got to stuff the money away or it becomes suboptimal in a hurry. It has to be a special type of life insurance that has the ability to take the money out without getting too technically. You got to be able to take it out easily. And a lot of policies are very restrictive. And then the third thing is, once again, just the restrictions, the handcuffs, because of the fact that you started this when you're fairly young.
He's 30, yeah.
Yeah, you're handcuffed to the strategy for the rest of your life. And if you change the strategy, you end up wasting a bunch of money because of all the life insurance rules that are out there. So I'm glad he didn't do it. So that takes off the rails a little bit. But let's talk about pre-tax versus Roth, this is cool. He is, as he mentioned, a high wage earner, which generally the financial planner circuit in my brain goes pre-tax, right? Mm-hmm. But then I hear that he's age 30. Mm-hmm. And the younger you are, the more that money in the Roth portion can expand and multiply. And as those babies multiply, all of this compounding interest multiplies. You get to take all that out tax-free. Mm-hmm. So if he were 50 in this case, I'd say making the right move pre-tax, might want to put a little bit away Roth. What I like for Chris is tax flexibility. where he gets some of the bird in the hand now by getting a tax break now because he's a fairly high wage earner. Mm-hmm. But then he also gives himself the ability to have flexibility later. And let's walk through that for a second. Let's say that he continues to only use the pre-tax 401k, where he gets the tax break now, mm-hmm. and his only option in retirement is to pull the money out and pay the tax. Well, let's say he retires, all his money's in this pre-tax 401k. If he wants to take some money out to go to Burger King, I don't know, to someplace,
which is always why I make withdrawals from my accounts.
That's the first thing I thought of. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm sure that's what Chris is thinking. What if I want to go to Burger King? He's got two choices, Paula. Mm-hmm. He can either eat and pay the tax or not eat, because he has no money in any other place than the pre-tax. But if he's got money in the Roth and in the pre-tax, now what he can do is he can take money out of the pre-tax up to the tax bracket line, mm-hmm. and then beyond that, take money out of the Roth so that he's living comfortably in a higher tax bracket, but the government's taxing him as if he's at a lower tax bracket. So having both, to me, is better than having one or the other.
Exactly. And that being said, because having both is better than having just one or the other, I'm going to throw in another variable here. Chris, if your employer is making a contribution to that 401k, if your employer is making some type of matching contribution, the employer's contribution most likely will be a pre-tax, a traditional contribution, which means that the employee contribution that you make could be Roth, and the employer match that you get could be pre-tax, traditional.
Such a great point.
Yes. So that's how you can have your Burger King and eat it too.
I might still have, to throw this whopper a little further, I might still have a little bit that's pre-tax because of the amount of money he's earning. Let's take advantage of some tax breaks today, because as an example, what we saw out of Washington maybe a month ago mm-hmm. was this rumbling, right? And by the way, don't make moves because of what's happening in Washington, D.C. Never, never. However, financial planners and CPAs have been predicting the government might not let that Roth not ever be taxed forever, right? And so I might want to get some of my Whopper with cheese now by getting the pre-tax now. So I don't know the exact formula, but maybe Paula, like a 25-75, 25 pre-tax, 75 Roth, and then he gets the rest up to the, through the match to make it more even. I don't know.
I mostly agree with you, Joe, except I'm leaning a little bit more towards having Chris put all of his money into all of his employee contribution into the Roth 401k.
Horrible idea.
Because he can only put a maximum at the age of 30. You can only put a maximum of $18,000 per year as the employee contribution into a 401k, regardless of whether it's a Roth or a trad. So what that means is, number one, if you are putting in $18,000, like let's assume that you put in $18,000 regardless of whether it's Roth or trad, by virtue of putting in $18,000 and also paying the taxes on it now, you are in essence making a bigger contribution than you would be if you were putting in $18,000 of pre-tax income. Does that make sense? Like if the numbers are the same, if that number of 18,000 is held as a constant, 18,000 plus the taxes that you're paying on it now is a larger overall chunk of what you're making than $18,000 of pre-tax income today. I hope I expressed that in a way that made sense. We chatted about this in the earlier, I think it was the interview with, was it Joshua Sheets? These interviews are all starting to blend together, but we talked about this in an earlier interview as well. Joe, did I just say that in a way that made sense?
Yeah, I think so. I've been worried here about the alternative minimum tax, and depending on how much he's subject to the AMT, I mean, that's a much fatter tax.
Yeah.
And so pre-tax is in my favor there. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Well, so the other reason. Okay, so the other reason, besides the fact that. And I totally agree with you. AMT is something that you definitely want to avoid. And that is a conversation to have with your CPA, because that's when it gets to AMT, it gets extremely complicated and hard to predict. But assuming that you won't be paying AMT, then the reason that I would lean towards you putting all of your money in a Roth account is, number one, Joe, like you said, Chris, you're young. You're 30 years old. So you've got a lot of time for dividends and capital gains to grow. And when you reach retirement age, all of that can get pulled out tax-free. the fact that you have so many additional decades to allow that growth to happen is a huge +1 for the Roth. Number 2, the fact that you can make a larger contribution of a chunk of your paycheck. Number 3, the fact that you should be able to find non-Roth ways to make retirement contributions outside of your 401k. So for example, I don't know what your health insurance situation is, but if you have an HSA compatible plan, the money that you save inside of your HSA will be a pre-tax contribution. So you can get a little bit of that pre-tax benefit by putting money in your HSA. Similarly, if you have an employer match to your 401k, that's more of a pre-tax benefit. If you make a non-deductible contribution into an IRA because you're over the income limits to make a deductible contribution, but you can make a non-deductible contribution into an IRA. And while that's not expressly pre-tax, it's some additional thing that you can do.
Break it up, Chris.
Yeah, basically what I'm saying is I think that Chris can break it up, but he can do so in ways that are outside of his 401k.
Break up the 401k, Chris. Don't listen to Paula. Listen to Joe.
But you and I, Joe, are close. Like, Joe, you're saying he should basically put 75% of it into a Roth, and I'm saying he should put 100% of it into a Roth. So you and I are not that far apart. We're talking like Whopper and Whopper with cheese. Exactly.
Right, to stretch that analogy further than it needed to go.
So I guess, Joe, you and I are in agreement, like within a given range, within a rounding error.
Conceptually,
yeah.
Yeah, which is good enough.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then be sure to subscribe to Paula's YouTube channel. Not only is every podcast episode and Ask Paula question released here on YouTube, other creative deep thought videos are created just for you. Remember, you can watch anything, just not everything. Fill your YouTube viewing time with more videos to make you think and grow so you can afford anything. Go ahead, hit that little red subscribe button. We'll take care of the rest.